When Schuyler Price opened the doors of the old aircraft hangar, sealed since the Cold War, a cold gust cut through, stirring dust into the pale green light. A system she thought was long dead flickered to life, and a voice crackled out like it had been waiting for decades. "Welcome back, Commander Price." Her heart pounded. In the reflection of the screen, she saw the shadow of her missing uncle, Hank. They called her a civilian engineer, an outsider. But inside this hangar, she wasn't just anyone. She was the final thread in a conspiracy the government had buried for good. If you believe truth deserves the light of day, share this story and subscribe to help keep the fire of justice alive. Phoenix, Arizona. A place where the sun scorches rooftops and life moves like sand, hot, dry, and quiet. Schuyler Price lived here, a 32-year-old aircraft engineer working at a small aviation maintenance garage. She was good at her job, kept to herself, and rarely drew attention. A typical American chasing freedom through honest work. Everything changed that fall. A call came from a law office in Routt County, Colorado. "Miss Price, Hank Price, your uncle, left you an inheritance. An old aircraft hangar, now under your name." Schuyler froze. She hadn't seen Uncle Hank in over 15 years. After a fierce argument between him and her father, something about military secrets, he vanished from their family's life. But she remembered him clearly. A wiry, quiet man who once taught her to fly RC planes in the backyard and called her the walking screwdriver. The lawyer added, in his private note he wrote, "Only Schuyler will know how to unlock what I left behind." She drove across state lines with her toolbox and a curiosity more profound than any circuit she'd ever worked on. The hangar sat beside an old airstrip, once a military base, decommissioned after the Cold War due to budget cuts. Outside, weeds reached her waist, fences hung broken, and a rusted sign flapped in the wind. "Restricted area, federal property." She slid the key into a corroded padlock. Click. The heavy metal door creaked open, like waking something old. Inside was pitch black. Stale oil, metal, and dust smelled like a wool blanket. Schuyler flicked on her flashlight. She bumped into a workbench. A toolbox toppled. Something small rolled across the floor. A silver pilot badge engraved with Hank Price, its edges worn. The scratch down the center still familiar. Schuyler picked it up. Then beep! A monitor snapped on. Power surged to the panels like a nervous system reigniting. A voice repeated, static-laced but unmistakable. "Welcome back, Commander Price." Schuyler froze. A rear door hissed open, revealing a shadowed corridor leading underground. She was just a civilian engineer, but this hangar didn't call her by her job. It used a military rank, and the only person in her family to ever earn one was Uncle Hank. Schuyler stepped through the steel door behind the screen. The hallway descended into the earth, cold, narrow, and steep. The walls were cracked concrete. Dust-covered wires drooped like dead vines. As she reached the basement floor, motion sensor lights flickered on, one by one. The glow was dim and yellow, like waking up industrial memory. In the center of the room sat an old control desk. On it, a reel-to-reel player, a first-gen digital reader, and a sealed wooden box. She reached forward instinctively. A red beam scanned her eye. Biometric recognition. Before she could react, a high-pitched tone rang in her head, like a soft crack behind her temple. A slight headache pulsed and faded. On the screen, text appeared. Match confirmed. Schuyler L. Price, clearance level 3. A small panel slid open, revealing a vintage USB port and tape deck. She inserted the tape. The projector buzzed. Then a grainy video began to play, and there he was. Hank, sitting in that room, hands on the desk. His military-issue jacket faded with time, silver streaks in his hair. If you're watching this, then I didn't make it. And maybe I never had a choice. Schuyler clenched the badge in her fist. OASIS wasn't a guidance system. It was a weapon, neural signal-based. In test number 4, 3 technicians died. They ordered the project scrubbed. But I couldn't look away. Hank stared into the camera. His voice is hoarse. In this country, people have the right to know, the right to choose. If the government forgets that, then folks like you, engineers, mechanics, everyday Americans, need to remind them. He paused, clearly holding back tears. Like you don't have to be a soldier to serve your country. You just have to not look away when you see the truth. The video ended. The tape rewound automatically. Skylar opened the wooden box. Inside, an old photo. Hank surrounded by 4 other uniformed men. Face hard, eyes tired. 3 of them, blacked out with thick ink. She unfolded a waxy map. Hand-drawn. Red dots scattered across the western U.S., each marked with cryptic labels. At the bottom of the box, a cold metal drive, etched into it. Do not activate unless there's no other way. Skylar sank to the concrete floor. She had never felt so small, but also never more certain that something was calling her by name. Leaving the underground chamber, Skylar shut down all power in the hangar and locked the main door with an old mechanical padlock. She wasn't sure who or what she was up against, but every instinct told her this was no longer a family matter. That night, she slept in her truck, parked behind an abandoned gas station 5 miles from the hangar. Around midnight, a noise woke her. Headlights flashed briefly across her rearview mirror. A black SUV stopped in the distance, sat there for nearly 2 minutes, then turned and disappeared into the dark. The next morning, Skylar returned to the hangar. She decided to inspect the underground room again. When she removed the main control panel, she found a small device hidden beneath a layer of cables, about the size of a lighter, with a faint green LED blinking softly. It wasn't receiving signals, it was transmitting. She immediately cut the power and opened the casing. Inside were a lithium battery, a micro circuit board, and a modern GPS chip. On the printed board, she saw a faint logo, Helix Industries. Skylar's heartbeat quickened. Helix had once been embroiled in a congressional scandal over neural interface technology experiments. Investigated, then cleared for lack of evidence. The name had faded from public memory, until now, when it sat right in front of her. In a surveillance device once handled by Hank himself, her breathing grew rapid. She realized she wasn't just uncovering a legacy. She had just touched a living branch of a buried conspiracy. She dug a small hole behind the hangar and buried the transmitter beneath soil and broken concrete. While gathering her things to leave, she noticed a strange scratch beneath the workbench. She pried it open and found a neatly folded note inside. The handwriting was familiar. "If you found this, it means the trap has been triggered. Don't panic. They'll come, but not right away. Bring the radio. Tune to 16.8 when you feel watched. No one is ever alone, no matter how much they want you to believe it." Skylar slipped the note into her pocket. She packed the notebook, the map, and the hard drive. Before leaving, she covered her laptop camera with black tape, removed the SIM card from her phone, and switched vehicles at a small garage she knew. When she started the old gray pickup, she looked into the rearview mirror one last time. No black SUV, no headlights. No one is following her. But that feeling, it was still there. Skylar drove north, following one of the red-marked coordinates on the map. Her destination was Coldridge Flight Training Station, a facility once used by the U.S. Air Force in the 1980s, which was later erased from official records after 2001. The place looked deserted when she arrived. Knee-high weeds, cracked windows, a rusted nameplate. But a fresh padlock and tire tracks in the dirt told her someone had been coming and going. Inside, she followed Hank's blueprint. Behind a false wall was a hidden stairway that didn't exist on the original layout. Descending, she turned on her flashlight. The concrete room below was filled with crates of files, magnetic tapes, and a military radio transmitter. On the desk lay an old black hard drive, labeled in shaky handwriting. "Use only if Monroe is alive." Skylar stared at it, her stomach tightening. Was Monroe, the agent who'd called her at the hangar, connected to Hank? She plugged the drive into her encrypted laptop. A video appeared. Not Hank, but Monroe, younger, in a training officer's uniform, stood in this room. If someone's watching this, I'm guessing Hank didn't make it out. Please don't blame him. We all knew it might end this way. He paused, voice lowering. I'm the only survivor of the OASIS 4 experiment. I signed the cover-up order. But Hank copied the data before the system was wiped. He believed something I'd forgotten. That justice doesn't come from orders. It comes from people willing to speak the truth. Monroe's voice cracked. The image trembled, like the tape itself was struggling to breathe. He left behind independent data stations. Each holds a fragment. If you found this one, keep going. And if you hear my name, don't be afraid. I don't work for them anymore. Skylar closed the video, her hands trembling. She looked around. On the wall was a geological map. 4 locations circled in red. Each site was deep in the mountains, far from civilization, where signals couldn't easily be traced. She understood now. Hank hadn't just left behind evidence. He had built a counter-system, a hidden network, a second chance. And Monroe, the man she once doubted, was now the only thread connecting 2 generations in a fight against an old shadow. Skylar sat beside the radio. She turned the dial to 16.8, just as Hank's note instructed. Only static filled the air, but somewhere within it, she heard 3 faint knocks, steady, rhythmic. 3 days later, Skylar met in the underground parking lot of an abandoned hotel in Denver. The man she met was Douglas Carr, an independent investigative journalist, and Hank's former civilian aerospace partner after his military service. Skylar had found his name in Hank's notes, next to a single line. If it needs to go public, give it to Doug. He once chose truth over safety. Douglas showed up right on time, wearing a weathered nylon jacket, glasses slipping down his nose. No electronics on him, just a blank hard drive and an encrypted laptop. Skylar handed over Hank's metal drive. Together they opened a few files. Images, audio logs, lists of deceased technicians, testing schematics, even video footage of someone convulsing from OASIS exposure. Douglas stared at the screen, then at her. If this is real, you're not just holding a time bomb. You're holding a nuclear media strike. Skylar nodded. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to relief. They agreed to meet again in 72 hours at a secure independent broadcasting tower to release the data. However, Douglas's entire investigation site disappeared from the internet 2 days later. Domain gone, articles wiped, social accounts vanished. A generic banner now filled the homepage. Temporarily offline due to technical issues, Skylar called him. No answer. Emailed, bounced, texted. Delivery failed. Worried, she drove to the newsroom. The glass door was shattered. Papers everywhere. Servers stripped bare. On the wall, in red marker, a message was scrawled. They know. The backup drive she'd given him? Gone. But under the desk, she found a partial fingerprint on the laptop glass. Not hers, not Douglas's. A screech of tires outside jolted her. Skylar bolted. Her heart is pounding. Sliding into her car, her burner phone buzzed in her pocket. One message, all caps. Stop or die. She couldn't breathe. The engine roared. She drove like her life depended on it. Because it now did. She had thought she'd passed on the truth. Thought Hank's legacy had made it into the world. But now she knew. They didn't just want to suppress the data. They wanted to erase the last person who held it. Skylar camped deep in the pines near Ridgeway, surviving on canned food and stream water. All electronics turned off. She slept little, always with her backpack under her head and the backup drive tucked inside her coat lining. She was running. But worse than the fear was the feeling she had already lost. Everything Hank left, gone. Everything she tried, blocked. And the worst part, she no longer knew who she could trust. While tending a fire that night, she heard a soft clink beneath the cooking stone. A small aluminum can rolled out, tapping her boot. Inside, an unmarked black USB drive, and a handwritten note. If you found this, the system's been breached, but there's still a way. H. Skylar looked around. No one. Just wind and bugs. She powered up an air-gapped laptop. No network, no webcam, and plugged it in. A video appeared. Grainy, dimly lit. Monroe. Not in a cold government suit. Wearing an old flight jacket. Standing in the same room Hank had once recorded from. If you're seeing this, then Hank was right. And I did my part. His voice was hoarse, tired. They took the bait. But Hank's recovery system doesn't live on any one drive. He broke it apart, scattered it across Cold War-era relay stations. I helped him build the code to put it back together. The screen lit up with a map of old transmission towers nationwide. That hard drive you carried? It was a decoy. When cloned illegally, it triggers a reverse pulse and simultaneously wakes the recovery network. Skylar jolted upright. She pulled out her map. Yes. Every location Hank had marked corresponded to an abandoned military relay or radar station. If you still have the Price biometric ID, you're the only one who can access the primary node. Not to download the data, but to broadcast it. Monroe looked straight into the lens. I'm not an agent anymore, I'm a soldier, and soldiers fight for what's right, not just what they're told. The video cut out. Skylar switched on her flashlight, scanning the map again. One site was marked twice, circled in red. Flagstaff Relay Tower, a defunct military uplink buried deep in the Arizona mountains. She looked up into the starless night. Her heart is hammering. Hank hadn't just left her the evidence. He left her a second chance. And if she failed this time, there would be no one left to carry the torch. At dawn the next morning, Skylar set out for Flagstaff. The relay tower was built deep inside a red rock canyon, behind an abandoned ranger outpost. Now just a few rusted steel columns and a crumbling broadcast mast standing against the wind. She arrived just before sunset. No power, no signal. But according to Monroe's diagram, the station had an independent solar grid, reactivated by Hank remotely the first time she powered up the hangar. Skylar climbed into the maintenance hatch and unscrewed the access panel. A control board lit up. The screen flickered, green, then white, then displayed. Biometric match, price lineage, system signal recovery in progress. She placed her finger on the scanner. The retinal reader blinked. Suddenly, every system in the station lit up at once, as if Hank himself was breathing through the wires. A sliding door opened, revealing the data transmission room. A world map appeared. The system auto-locked onto 23 broadcast channels, ranging from international human rights organizations to press agencies, congressional inquiry groups, and encrypted whistleblower platforms. One prompt blinked. Broadcast to all? Yes, no. Skylar didn't hesitate. She hit yes. The system began transmitting. The files fractured, encrypted, and routed through the entire network. Hank's notes, Skylar's discovery, audio tapes, test logs, names of the dead, redacted history, truth flying through the American sky like 1,000 bullets made of light. Beep! 80%, 81%, 82%. But then, from the ridge above came the sound of rotor blades. Skylar ran to the observation slit. A small, unmarked helicopter was descending. 3 figures in light tactical armor, rifles fitted with suppressors. She grabbed the backup drive and shoved it into her coat. Back at the screen, 98%, 99%. Transmission complete. No time to wait. She bolted for the emergency hatch, marked on Hank's geologic map as a path to an old mining tunnel. The rusted lever creaked. The door burst open. Skylar dove into the darkness, gasping like she'd never breathed before. Behind her, flashlight beams danced across the relay room. Then, boom, a soft explosion. They'd destroyed the system, but it was too late. The data was gone, the truth was out, and Skylar, the overlooked mechanic, had just awakened a nation with something she could never keep for herself again. 2 weeks later, in a small wooden cabin hidden among Colorado pines, Skylar was rebuilding an old propeller plane Hank had once left unfinished. No phone signal, no traffic noise, just metal clinking against metal, wind rustling the trees, and the steady rhythm of a wrench striking bolts. She wasn't running anymore. She was breathing again. On a weathered radio, she caught bits of news. An independent European network released the first encrypted OASIS files. A group of lawmakers in D.C. announced a special hearing. Families who'd lost loved ones to training accidents were finally being heard. No one mentioned Skylar's name, and that's exactly how she wanted it. While cleaning the control panel, she found a hidden compartment in the cockpit. Inside was an old U.S. Air Force badge. On the back, etched faintly, "To live free is to risk. To risk is to remember." She smiled, pinned it to her jacket, not as a soldier, but as someone who had taken the flame and refused to let it die. That evening, she rolled the plane down a grassy runway. The engine roared to life for the first time in nearly 2 decades. Just before takeoff, she placed a small item on a rock near the trail. Hank's old badge wrapped in a red cloth. Part farewell, part promise. The plane surged forward, lifting into the burning gold of sunset. Far ahead, the Grand Canyon split the earth like a sacred wound, and Skylar soared across it, like a bird carrying something the land could no longer hold. The truth, she didn't know where she'd go next, but for the first time in her life, every destination felt like a beginning. Because she was no longer searching for the answer, she had become one. If you've ever felt too small to make a difference, remember, sometimes it's the underestimated ones who reignite justice. If you believe truth shouldn't be buried, that courage still lives among us. Share this story. And if you want to stand with people like Skylar, subscribe. Let's keep that flame alive, together.